Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and corruption. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg, and we have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. Staring out my window this morning, at rain-darkened skies, I realized we have arrived firmly in the murdery part of the year. And, after telling a couple of Halloween murder stories, as I was casting about for what our next story should be, I reflected again that there's an extra bite in the air, an extra twinge to old injuries, and an ancient knowledge deep in our bones that these are the months for murder. And so, I decided to be inspired by my calendar once again, and I entered a very simple search into my browser, November Murders, and gee whiz did that query pay off in spades. Or rather, it paid off in meat cleavers and shovels. My question about November Murders led me instead to serial killers born in November, and here I landed upon the notorious Belle Gunness, also known as the Indiana Ogress and the Mistress of Castle Death. These nicknames were not spun up by me, but rather given to her by her contemporaries. So, if you're curious as I am how the heck a Norwegian farm wife became known as the Mistress of Castle Death, well then, I suggest that you put your carry-on item underneath the seat in front of you. Stow your luggage in the overhead compartment. Let go of the cares of the day, but be sure to fasten your seatbelt, because there's turbulence expected ahead. Brutal Belle Gunness, the Mistress of Castle Death, starts now. On a pig farm in LaPorte, Indiana, Belle Gunness killed two of her husbands, a handful of single men, and several of her own children before mysteriously disappearing in 1908. To outsiders, Belle Gunness might have looked like a lonely widow who lived in the American Midwest, but in reality, she was a serial killer who murdered at least 14 people, and some estimates say that she may have killed as many as 40. Gunness had a system. The Norwegian-American woman posted ads in the paper looking for men to invest in her farm. Fellow Norwegian-Americans flocked to her property, hoping for a taste of home, along with a solid business opportunity. To lure her last victim, Gunness wrote, "My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Of course, Andrew could not have suspected that the forever to which Belle referred was the same forever that we all one day face, the pitiless forever of death. And so Andrew did come, and shortly after he arrived, Gunness killed him and buried his dismembered body in her hog pen, alongside other corpses. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's begin at the beginning. Brunhilde Paulsdatter Storseth, later to be known as Belle Gunness, was born in Selbu, Norway, on November 11, 1859, to Paul and Berit Storseth. She was the youngest of 8 children, and was confirmed by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in 1874. At age 14, she began working by milking and herding cattle to save enough money for passage to New York. She moved to the United States in 1881, when she was processed by immigration at Castle Garden and changed her first name to Belle. Belle then traveled to Chicago to join her sister Nellie, who had immigrated several years earlier. In Chicago, while living with her sister and brother-in-law, she worked as a domestic servant, then got a job at a butcher's shop until her first marriage in 1884. She was at least 5 foot 7 inches tall, and weighed between 210 and 250 pounds. She was physically strong and masculine in appearance. After moving to Chicago, Belle married her first husband and victim, Mads Sorensen, in 1884. Mads would also reveal that Belle had not just a taste for brutal murder, but also for insurance fraud. Sorensen and Gunness owned a candy store, which burned to the ground. Coincidentally, the couple's home had also burned down, and in both instances, the burning of the store and of their home, the couple was granted generous insurance payouts. Additionally, 2 babies in Belle and Mads' home died from inflammation of the large intestine, which can be the result of poisoning. Belle had insured both of the children and collected a large insurance check after each death. Neighbors gossiped about the baby, since Belle never appeared to be pregnant. Sorensen had purchased 2 life insurance policies, and on one particular date, July 30th, 1900, both policies were active at the same time, as one expired that day and the other began. But it also meant that if Mad Sorensen died on that one day, July 30th, 1900, then both would pay out. And, as luck or murderous plotting, perhaps, would have it, Mad Sorensen died that day, July 30th, 1900, of cerebral hemorrhage. Belle Gunness would explain to authorities that he had come home with a headache and that she provided him with quinine powder for the pain. She later checked in on him and he was dead. As mentioned, Gunness collected money from both the expiring life insurance policy and the one that went into effect that very same day, which came to a total of $5,000, roughly $177,000 today. And with that money, she moved to LaPorte, Indiana, where she purchased a pig farm, where she would live with her daughters Myrtle and Lucy, along with a foster daughter named Jenny Olson. New neighbors described the 200-pound Gunness as a rugged woman who was also incredibly strong. One man who helped her move in later claimed that he saw her lift a 300-pound piano all by herself. "I like music at home," she supposedly said as way of explanation. In April 1902, she married Peter Gunness, the man whose surname she would make famous as Belle Gunness, the Indiana Ogress. Tragedy swiftly returned to Belle's doorstep yet again. Peter Gunness's infant daughter from a previous relationship died. Then, Peter himself also died. Apparently, he'd fallen victim to a sausage grinder that fell on his head from a wobbly shelf. The coroner described the incident as a little queer, but believed that it was an accident. As for Gunness, she dried her tears and collected her husband's life insurance policy. Only one person seemed to be catching on to Gunness's murdery habits, and that was her foster daughter, Jenny Olson. "My mama killed my papa," Olson allegedly told her schoolmates. "She hit him with a meat cleaver and he died. Don't tell a soul." Soon afterward, Olson also vanished. Her foster mother initially claimed that she'd been sent to school in California, but years later, the little girl's body would be found in Belle Gunness's hog pen. Perhaps Belle Gunness needed money, or perhaps she had developed a taste for murder. Either way, the twice-widowed Gunness began posting personal ads in Norwegian-language newspapers to find a new companion. One such ad read, "Personal. Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with a view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." According to Harold Schechter, a true crime author who wrote Hell's Princess, The Mystery of Belle Gunness, Butcher of Men, Gunness knew exactly how to lure her victims onto her farm. Like many psychopaths, Schechter writes, she was very shrewd in identifying potential victims. These were lonely Norwegian bachelors, many completely cut off from their families. Belle beguiled them with promises of down-home Norwegian cooking and painted a very seductive portrait of the kind of life they'd enjoy. But the men that came to her farm would not have a life to enjoy for very long. They arrived with thousands of dollars, and then disappeared. One lucky man named George Anderson survived the encounter. Anderson had come to the Gunness farm from Missouri with money and a hopeful heart, but he awoke one night to a terrifying sight, Gunness leaning over his bed as he slept. Anderson was so startled by the ravenous expression in her eyes that he left immediately. Meanwhile, neighbors noted that Gunness had begun to spend an unusual amount of time at her hog pen at night. She also seemed to spend a lot of money on wooden trunks, which witnesses said she would lift like a box of marshmallows. Meanwhile, men showed up one by one at her door, and then kept vanishing without a trace. Mrs. Gunness received men visitors all the time, one of her farmhands later told the New York Tribune. A different man came nearly every week to stay at the house. She introduced them as cousins from Kansas, South Dakota, Wisconsin, from Chicago. She was always careful to make the children stay away from her cousins. In 1906, Belle Gunness connected with her final victim. Andrew Helgalian found her ad in the Minneapolis Tidende, a Norwegian-language newspaper. Before long, Gunness and Helgalian began exchanging romantic letters. "We shall be so happy once you get here," Gunness purred in one letter. "My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever. And as I mentioned at the start, while Andrew may have come prepared to stay forever, it's unlikely he was prepared to stay forever in the way that the Indiana Ogress meant. But Helgalian, like other victims before him, decided to take a chance on love. He moved to LaPorte, Indiana on January 3rd, 1908, to be with Belle. Then he, and perhaps this is unsurprising by now, suddenly disappeared. So far, Belle Gunness had been able to largely escape detection or suspicion. But after Andrew Helgalian stopped answering letters, his brother Assel got worried and demanded answers. Gunness deflected. "You wish to know where your brother keeps himself," Gunness wrote to Assel. "Well, this is just what I would like to know, but it seems impossible for me to give a definite answer." She suggested that maybe Andrew Helgalian had gone to Chicago, or perhaps back to Norway, but Assel Helgalian didn't seem to be falling for it. Concurrently, Gunness had begun to develop problems with a farmhand named Ray Lampier. He had romantic feelings for Gunness and resented all the men that showed up on her property. The two once apparently had a relationship, but Lampier had left in a jealous rage after Helgalian arrived. On April 27, 1908, Belle Gunness went to see an attorney in LaPorte. She told them that she had fired her jealous farmhand Lampier, which caused him to go mad, and Gunness also claimed that she needed to make a will because Lampier had apparently threatened her life. "The man is out to get me," Gunness told the attorney. "I fear one of these nights he will burn my house to the ground." Of course, Belle herself, as we know, had a track record of burning her own homes to the ground, and sure enough, she left her attorney's office, then bought toys for her children and 2 gallons of kerosene. That night, someone set her farmhouse on fire. Authorities found the bodies of Gunness's 3 children in the charred rubble of the farmhouse basement. They also found the body of a headless woman who at first they assumed was Belle Gunness. Lampier was quickly charged with murder and arson, and police began to search the farm grounds, hoping to find Gunness's head. Meanwhile, Assel Helgalian had read about the fire in the newspaper and showed up in hopes of finding his brother. For a while, Helgalian assisted the police as they sorted through the rubble. Although he almost left, Helgalian became convinced he couldn't do so without looking harder for Andrew. "I was not satisfied," Helgalian recalled. "I went back to the cellar and asked one of Gunness's farmhands whether he knew of any hole or dirt having been dug up there about the place in spring. In fact, the farmhand did. Belle Gunness had asked him to level dozens of soft depressions in the ground, which supposedly covered trash." Hoping to find a clue related to his brother's disappearance, Helgalian and the farmhand began to dig up a pile of soft dirt in the hog pen. To their horror, they ended up finding Andrew Helgalian's head, hands, and feet stuffed into an oozing gunny sack. Further digging yielded more grisly discoveries. In the span of 2 days, investigators found a total of 11 burlap sacks, which contained arms hacked from the shoulders down and masses of human bone wrapped in loose flesh that dripped like jelly. Authorities couldn't identify the bodies, but they could identify Jenny Olson, Gunness's foster daughter who had supposedly left for California, and it soon became clear that Gunness was behind some horrific crimes. Before long, news of the gruesome discoveries spread throughout the nation. American newspapers labeled Belle Gunness the Black Widow, Hell's Belle, Indiana Ogress, and of course, the Mistress of the Castle of Death. Reporters described her home as a horror farm and a death garden. Curious onlookers flocked to LaPorte, and it became a local and a national attraction, to the point that visitors reportedly sold ice cream, popcorn, cake, and something called Gunness stew to visitors. So in case you had any doubts, poor taste in the name of profit is nothing new. Meanwhile, authorities struggled to determine whether the headless corpse they'd found in the burned farmhouse belonged to Gunness. Although the police found a set of teeth among the ruins, there was still some debate as to whether or not they belonged to Belle Gunness. Curiously, the corpse itself seemed much too small to be hers. Even DNA tests that were done decades later, from envelopes that Gunness had licked, were unable to definitively answer if she had in fact died in the fire. In the end, Ray Lampier was charged with arson, but not murder. "I know nothing about this house of crime, as they call it," he said when asked about Gunness's murders. "Sure, I worked for Mrs. Gunness for a time, but I didn't see her kill anybody, and I didn't know she had killed anybody." But on his deathbed, Lampier changed his tune. He admitted to a fellow inmate that he and Gunness had killed 42, that's 42 men together. She would spike their coffee, bash their heads in, cut up their bodies, and put them in sacks, he explained, and then he did the the planting. Lampier ended up in prison because of his connection to Gunness and the fire on her farm. But did Lampier actually cause the fire? And did Gunness really die in the farmhouse disaster? Years after Gunness's supposed demise, rumors surfaced that she may have faked her own death to escape potential capture, or perhaps because she simply wanted to be free to kill again. Eerily, in 1931, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning a Norwegian-American man and attempting to steal his money. She died of tuberculosis while awaiting trial, but many couldn't help but notice that she bore a striking resemblance to Gunness, and even had a photograph of kids who looked a lot like Gunness's children. It remains unconfirmed when, where, and even if Belle Gunness actually died. Of course, one would assume that she's dead now, for if she were still alive, she would be 263 years old, a murderous wanderer haunting La Plante, Indiana, or possibly Los Angeles, California, or even Chicago or Selbu, Norway. That true human horror, Belle Gunness, the Mistress of Castle Death. And with those macabre thoughts firmly walled off in one corner of our minds, before I say goodbye, I would like to remind you all, as I often do, of two things. The first, that I am a disabled person with cerebral palsy, and I would like Kinda Murdery to become a support community for people with disabilities, physical or otherwise. So if you have a story you'd like to share, please do reach out to me, kindamurdery@gmail.com. Also, please remember the free 3-digit lifeline number 988 that you can call to receive immediate counseling for mental health, substance use, or suicidal thoughts. So if you're in crisis, please do call 988. And please always remember that the world is a better place with you in it. And if you're not in immediate crisis and you'd just like to make a connection with someone, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Again, that email is kindamurdery@gmail.com. I'm here. I care. I would love to hear from you. So once again, I say thank you to all of you for your companionship, for your community, for walking these dark paths at my side. I'm so thankful to have you. I hope you enjoyed Belle Gunness, the Mistress of Castle Death. Please do join me again this coming Sunday, November 6th, for another Kinda Murdery story. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. I look forward to seeing you soon.